This is Mac OS Ken.
A wild financial week for Apple. Butterfly checks are finally in the mail, and Time Bandits steals viewer attention. It is Wednesday, the 7th of August, 2024. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. I gotta confess, I have yet to hear last week's June quarter earnings call. Probably listen to it at some point, and we'll see how things go over the next few days. Let us hit some of the very basic points as shared by iDownload blog. iPhone revenue was down $39.3 billion versus $39.67 billion. Wasn't down $39.3 billion. I'm sorry, I said that weird. It was down. It came in at $39.3 billion versus $39.67 billion for the same quarter a year earlier. That may have been due to a combination of stronger competition in China and people holding off for new iPhones this fall. Revenue for wearables, home, and accessories was also down $8.10 billion versus $8.28 billion. Not unlike iPhones, iDownload blog says sales of wearables were down as people hold out for the next round. Revenue for the Mac was up $7.01 billion versus $6.84 billion for the year-ago quarter, and revenue for iPad was way up, coming in at $7.16 billion versus $5.79 billion. Credit there to the new iPad Pro and iPad Air models introduced earlier this year. Not only did that help break iPad's streak of quarterly sales declines, it also helped turn the tide for tablets as a whole. A release last week from market tracker IDC said that new products from a number of vendors, including Apple, brought the tablet category to a place of strength, though that was when comparing them to pre-pandemic shipment levels and not to the unprecedented sales witnessed during the pandemic. Services crushed it, up to $24.2 billion versus $21.21 billion a year earlier. And we add, subtract, carry the whatever, and Apple ended with total revenue of $85.78 billion, a June quarter revenue record, according to an Apple press release. That was way ahead of June quarter revenue of $81.8 billion a year ago, on earnings per share of $1.40 versus last year's $1.26. Only one analyst heard anything on the call that made making adjustments seem necessary, and you'll never guess who, except of course you will, and you'll never guess why, except of course you will again. Running through the usual list of analyst reactions, Apple 3.0 had Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives hefting higher his firm's price target on the Cupertino company. While the street was widely expecting a weaker June quarter, according to Ives, instead, Cook & Company delivered a better-than-expected quarter with beats on the top and bottom lines. This was an upbeat conference call in our view, as stronger September guidance is just the opening act for the main event, which is an AI-driven supercycle starting with iPhone 16, launching in mid-September. Mr. Ives has an outperform rating on Apple shares. He used last week's note to raise his price target on the shares from $275 to $285. In a vacuum, Apple shares might have glided higher on the beat and the iPhone excitement, but shares do not trade in a vacuum. I read an interesting bit from The Atlantic written on Monday, quoting part of the opening, "What's going on in the global markets? Any attempt at an explanation has to start here. Nobody actually understands how markets work. This is not a cop-out, it's a boring statement of fact. It is not humanly possible to fully comprehend an equilibrium with tens of thousands of parties and counterparties making decisions based on dynamic and asymmetric information flows. As a result, you should generally distrust almost every article that attempts to explain the cause of stock market gyrations, just as you should generally distrust people who predict the weather by staring at tea leaves." A lot has happened in the past week. A piece from Seeking Alpha said key stock averages sold off last Friday, with the Nasdaq Composite sliding into correction after the July jobs report stoked fears the U.S. economy is headed toward a recession and the Federal Reserve is behind the curve in cutting interest rates. So there was Apple down just a bit on Friday. Over the weekend came news that Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway had unloaded a lot of Apple shares. Like, a lot. According to a piece from Apple Insider, in the second quarter of 2024, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway made the biggest sale of Apple in years, unloading around 400 million shares and missing the post-WWDC stock peak. In December 2023, the piece went on to say Berkshire Hathaway held about $174.3 billion in Apple stock. As of the Saturday Berkshire Hathaway report, the company now holds about $84.2 billion in Apple stock, assuming they haven't sold more in the past month. Why? Well, not unlike the piece from The Atlantic about the market as a whole, Buffett's reasons are his own, or will be until he decides to share them, assuming he does. A piece from Fox Business had Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives, and not poo-pooing the Buffett news exactly, but not freaking out about it either. The premise of the story was that Buffett was getting defensive in his holdings, converting a lot to cash. In that piece, Ives noted, as did Apple Insider, that Berkshire still has Apple as its number one position, more than double the firm's stake in its second largest holding, Bank of America. Despite the brutal Friday sell-off in tech last week, Ives says Buffett is a core believer in Apple, and we do not view this as a smoke signal for bad news ahead. Of course, that was before the wacky Monday. Still, one assumes Ives is where he was when he took that stance. And then, as H.I. McDonough once said, the roof caved in. Quoting another piece from Apple Insider, following both news of Berkshire Hathaway's selling over half its holdings in the company and a wider fear of recession taking a steep toll on international stock markets, Apple shares took a steep dive as trading began on Monday. That sent Apple shares down about $10, a bit yikesy. While most of the market recovered on Tuesday, Apple shares managed to lose another couple of bucks, perhaps thanks to uncertainty around its future with its bestest frenemy, Google. Yeah, remember the DOJ case against Google and fears of what ramifications that might bring? They're on the horizon. A piece from Engadget on Monday had Judge Amit Mehta of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia ruling that Google is a monopolist and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. That included such actions as paying companies like Mozilla, Samsung, and Apple billions of dollars per year for the default search position on their various services. Among the many questions now, what will the ruling mean for the billions of dollars Apple gets from the search giant? And no word so far. The judge has apparently not imposed any remedies on Google to this point. That said, whether Google does something to please the judge or remedies are imposed, it will end up costing Apple. Apple 3.0 had JP Morgan analyst Samik Chatterjee weighing the potential impact on Tuesday. In relation to Apple, he sees three possibilities or probabilities. An appeal of the verdict by Google because, Apple and Google striking a deal that is less lucrative for Apple, though less likely to run afoul of antitrust law for Google, and Apple building its own general search engine. The bright spot in all of this, as pointed out by Apple 3.0's Philip Elmer DeWitt, it seems more than likely that the judgment will be tied up in court for years. Mr. Chatterjee has an overweight rating on Apple shares. His price target on the shares is $265, and now I don't know whether I should apologize for going away or apologize for coming back. Monday was another sizable day for betas for developers. A number of pieces from Mac Rumors had Apple seeding the 5th betas of iOS and iPadOS 18 to members of the developer community, along with macOS Sequoia 15, watchOS 11, tvOS 18, and visionOS 2. A day later, a few betas for public testers were released. We turned again to Mac Rumors, which had word of the 3rd public betas of iOS and iPadOS 18, macOS Sequoia 15, watchOS 11, and tvOS 18. Folks who want in on the public testing action can find out more at beta.apple.com. If you're expecting a payment from Apple's Butterfly keyboard settlement, get ready to be happy. Engadget says payments of up to $395 have started arriving to consumers. We'll wrap the day with some Apple TV Plus news, starting with a surprising TV series tease. The Cupertino streamer issued a press release last week, giving a first look at the psychological thriller Before. According to the release, the show centers on the character Eli, a child psychiatrist who, after recently losing his wife, encounters a troubled young boy who seems to have a haunting connection to Eli's past. As Eli attempts to help the boy, their mysterious bond deepens. It's the casting that's going to pique people's interest, maybe because it's the surprise. Eli is played by comedian and comic actor Billy Crystal. City Slickers, When Harry Met Sally, Soap, for crying out loud. Yes, that, Billy Crystal. Also Judith Light and Rosie Perez, among others. 10 episodes in this limited series. No trailer yet, though there's plenty of time. The first 2 episodes hit Apple TV Plus on Friday, the 25th of October. They'll follow one per Friday after that, through the 20th of December. And finally today, Apple TV Plus is still scoring well on the US streaming sites Real Good and Just Watch, and I'm happy to say a show for which I was pulling is pretty high up. As it did when Dark Matter was all the rage, Cult of Max says the Cupertino streamer has 3 shows in the top 10 list for the competing tracking services. Real Good has the Natalie Portman Moses Ingram Mind Trip, Lady in the Lake at number 8. The TV reimagining of Time Bandits is in 5th, and the Jake Gyllenhaal drama Presumed Innocent wrapped its run at number 1. Sliding over to the Just Watch list, Lady in the Lake is a little deeper in the list, showing up at number 9. Time Bandits fares better, though, turning up at number 3. Both lists agree on Presumed Innocent. The drama was also on top of the Just Watch list. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. Joel on True.
I have been, and ever shall be, your friend.